began with the forging of the great rings. 9 rings were gifted to the race of men who, above all else, desire power. Sauron forged in secret a master ring. One by one, the free lands of Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring.
We are talking about the point that this is an adaptation, that the Lord of the Rings, the adaptation that Peter Jackson made, kind of brings up the point, to me at least, that is any adaptation of a book to film ever good? How many have there really been? And so what happens is you have a great book, a great author like J.R. Tolkien, who has spent his entire life, everything leads up to this. And then you have a director who, sadly now for a lot of Tolkien's works, has been handpicked by some studio executive and isn't a passion project like Peter Jackson's was. But even then, Peter Jackson hadn't spent his life about Middle-earth. And so his insight into creating something that is as deep and as powerful as Tolkien's own story in the written word is just going to be lackluster. So that's my initial take on the adaptations. I was negative from the get-go. I wasn't happy that they were making changes and they were modifying the characters that I knew and the places that I saw in my own head. But that was my first thought of this. There's a problem with adaptations.
I look at this in 2 ways. One is, if you're going to make a movie out of a book, it's going to be an adaptation. There simply is no way to put the book wholesale in. You can't do thoughts in characters' heads. You can't do, you can sometimes in some ways, but really, for the most part, you're not going to be able to convey everything that the book conveys.
Right.
You're going to have to adapt. So I look at this in 2 lights. The first is from the perspective of, and I think, was it good? Was it as good as the books? Never will be. I agree with your point that there are few to zero movie adaptations that are as good as a good book.
Mm-hmm.
However, the real question is, was it good for a movie adaptation? And that's the way I entered into it. I never entered into it trying to compare it to the books, except in terms of its plot lines and its overall in the intent of the storytelling arc. So I'm a little more forgiving about the fact that it's an adaptation.
Yeah.
I don't see how it could not be. One of the things we do need to address, however, is the Christopher Tolkien quote about this, where he says the commercialization has reduced the aesthetic and philosophic impact of the creation to nothing. A little extreme, but they eviscerated the books by making it an action movie for young people aged 15 to 25. So yeah. I see 2 general criticisms there by Christopher, and one is the reduction of the aesthetic and philosophic impact of Middle-earth on screen. So reducing the aesthetic and the philosophy, and 2, turning into a spectacle, essentially, an action, in his opinion, an action movie for 15 to 25-year-olds.
Well, I think that brings up the way we're going to go about doing this, which is going over 3 questions each week. And you're much more gracious about adaptations than I am. I'm just unable to emotionally separate myself as well as a lot of people are. And I accept that.
That's fair.
But the first question we're going to deal with is it lore friendly? Meaning, is the simple fact that it's an adaptation, is it a lore friendly change? I know this is going to be a lot more easy to answer when we're very specific about the changes, but in this general one,
right,
that's the question that we're dealing with. So is it lore friendly? I am, in our answer here, this is just a yes/no question.
Right. We're very black and white on our 2 of our questions, and then the third one we allow ourselves a scale.
Yeah. So is it lore friendly? That's a no for me.
I agree. It is not lore friendly.
Okay.
And the reason it's not lore friendly is because, by definition, when you adapt a book, you are changing the lore. So it's just, by its very nature, it's necessarily not lore friendly.
Yeah. And I will tell you, like when they announced Lord of the Rings in 98, late 98, early 99, I was excited, but man, I was scared too. It was a very difficult time for me as a fan of Tolkien, because I really wanted it to be something great.
Right.
And then I was very disappointed when I saw the films, because it wasn't the characters that I knew. and that I saw. So okay, so that's our first question. Is it lore friendly? Our next question then, is the change necessary for cinema? Again, this is a lot simpler when it's not a super broad ranging question like it's an adaptation, or what does an adaptation work? So is the change necessary? Michael, you can go first on this one.
I say, given the reasons that I said before, it is necessary for cinema. You do need to adapt a book in order to put it on screen.
Yeah. I agree. You have to adapt it. There are very few books that, or anything that's adapted that doesn't have any change, right? You have to make changes. And in some, like Lord of the Rings, they make them shorter. In some, like The Hobbit, they make them incredibly long.
Well, yeah, I sadly, I am actually going to reference the Hobbit movies a few times during this because there's some surprising examples. But yes, we're not going to cover the Hobbit movies because the Hobbit movies are a travesty.
If we do,
as a whole,
like we said, it'll be what did they get right, and that list will be a lot shorter than what they
It'll be super short.
Changed.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. And so the last question is how much do we like the changes? Now, I mean, maybe this is putting the cart before the horse, and that like we're kind of like taking the whole adaptation and saying like, how much do we like the films? I guess in a way, or how much do we like that they made an adaptation? Is perhaps the better way of putting it.
I think that's better. I don't think like a judgment. I guess we can come up with a judgment of the whole films. That would be weird because I actually have different numbers for different of the films, but let's avoid that one and just go with what you said, which was how much do we like the fact that they adapted? Is that your question?
Yeah. I think on a scale of 1 to 5, no 0. Michael and I had this discussion. There's no zeros on this scale, so don't go after us if we don't give anything a 0. We're starting with 1. 1 is the worst, okay? Just putting that out there, clarify for anybody who's binging this from the get-go like 6 years from now. I'm going to split the difference. I'm just going to say a 3 because there were things that I liked. There were things that I liked, and there were things that I couldn't stand. So I don't know. I'm going to split the difference. If it was right after I saw Fellowship of the Ring, I would have given it a 1. Or really would have.
Interesting.
Time
so
has changed.
The years have softened your opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm not allowed to use half points, I'm going to go with a 4. I do. I like the fact that they made the adaptation because I think that was the only thing I could do. I do like the fact because of how it was done, because it was I believe, a well-intentioned and somewhat well carried out. In fact, in some places, largely well carried out adaptation of the books. I'll have plenty to complain about, but I think overall, I'm more happy than I am not that this was true, that Lord of the Rings was adapted by Peter Jackson. Now, if we had this number for the Ralph Bakshi, for example, or others, that Peter Jackson's attempt at The Hobbit or Rings of Power, the number would be much less. But I'm favorable towards the adaptation. So there you go.
That's like getting a B. It's like 80%. I'm down to 60. I'm on the verge of an F for this, I guess. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think all in all, looking back, knowing what we get with a lot of adaptations, that's probably softened my stance a lot too, because a lot of the adaptations you get now, because they're so, as I mentioned earlier, they're such a corporate exercise. They are just not up to par, up to any sort of. There's no fire under anybody to create these here, other than the almighty dollar. It seems like, and they pay a ton to get it, and then they don't pay enough to get somebody who really, really wants to do it, or they don't take the time to find somebody, or maybe there's just no finding anybody at all. So anyway, adaptations, they're going down the tubes these days. I don't hold much hope out for most of these adaptations anymore. I'm looking more forward to new stories that hopefully
I like that
people are writing.
And just so our listeners understand the 5-point scale from my perspective, the way I'm looking at the 5-point scale is very simple. It's not a letter grade, because then there would be 1 or 2 would both be Fs.
I know.
So it would be, for me, if I love the change, if I think it's fantastic, I'll give it a 5. If I think it's good or acceptable, I'll give it a 4. If I'm ambivalent, I'll give it a 3. If I dislike it, a 2. And if I despise it and I believe it's an abhorrence, then I will give it a 1. So that's that's my scale.
I would concur. All right. So we both agree that it's not lore friendly. and we both agree that it's necessary, which is an interesting thing.
Well, and very, very specific to this particular
Yeah.
change, because this is the overarching, the making of the movie.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you have a different thought about this and you're watching on YouTube, give us a comment below. Let us know what you think about this. Is there a change that you would make to our scale here?